You may be asking yourself, why would you switch mazdaspeed 3 pump on your mazdaspeed 6? And the big reason for me is going to be space. My setup specifically, I plan on going front mount, and because I have my oil cooler mounted down here, and I really don't want to move that because it's in an amazing spot for cooling and just keeping it out of the way of the radiator, my best bet is to find a way to get rid of this reservoir and have more space here to run the piping down through the frame rail and then around the core support to the actual front mount there. So here's what I figured out about doing. Here we have a mazdaspeed 3 pump. Obviously this came with the mazdaspeed 3 with the same engine, so it's going to be the same sort of pump mounting and all that. This will work just fine. This mazdaspeed cars have the same size pulley. I believe the CX-7 and stuff like that have a smaller power steering pulley, so you would have to swap the pulleys if you were to get a CX-7 pump, but just look for a Speed 3 pump. This has a fitting on the outside of it that runs to a reservoir instead of having the reservoir integrated like the factory setup. So what this allows you to do is remote mount the reservoir and save a bunch of space. You can see here, here's where our pump ends. It's only about 1.5 inches to the end here, so that would give us more room. On this setup, your pump ends here, but there's like 3 inches of reservoir and this line that prevents anything from running in front of here. So I'm gonna gain a ton of space by doing this. Because the pump itself is a direct fit, the only thing you have to figure out is a reservoir situation. And coincidentally, this happened to be the best idea, in my opinion. Most reservoirs will exit out the bottom, so both the fittings will be at the bottom of the reservoir, and this creates a problem when it comes to mounting this in the car. There's not much space over here, and I wanted to keep it on this side of the vehicle to simplify the lines. I'm not trying to run the lines all the way from here to here just to feed the pump. So with this setup, you can mount it as low as you possibly can, and the fittings will still be able to feed the pump just fine. And what I figured out was there's a spot here where there's pretty much nothing going on. Right here, ignore this power cable, but right here there's nothing going on. So I cut the little tab out of the fender mount here and then allowed the reservoir to slip right on in. There's some stuff in the way at the moment, but you can see this will kind of fit in there like that. The hose will feed the factory 3 pump, just like the Speed 3 would actually. This is even the Speed 3 hose that I picked up from the junkyard. I hate coming here, but we're finally in after waiting like 5 minutes in line just to get into place. I think what we're looking for is in 21, so we're gonna be walking down here till we see a Speed 3. Here we have it. And it has just what I'm looking for. Hell yeah. That fluid is nasty. Whatever. Should work. Side note. Wonder what happened to this thing. And after literally 15 minutes of sitting in line, consisting of 5 people, we have what we came for. This is a mazdaspeed 3 reservoir and hose. I think they overcharged for this stuff. It was 20 bucks for both of them, which I know is cheap, but this is a junkyard, and normally prices are worse than that. So. One thing to note, the fitting on the pump is a 1/2 inch, but the fitting on the reservoir is a 5/8 inch. So this hose actually already has that switch integrated, so this is easy to use. But you can see this will fit pretty much right in the factory location that the Speed 3 would and work just fine. My setup specifically also has a power steering cooler, so what this will do is allow me to simplify the lines. The 3 reservoir, like I said, has that 5/8 fitting, but this lower one is a 3/8 fitting. The lines I'm actually using for the cooler are already 3/8 fittings, and the line coming off the power steering rack is also a 3/8 line that you won't be able to see down there. So what this allows me to do is just use one hose to feed the pump, and then in one single 3/8 line to the rack, well, I guess 2 because I have to integrate the cooler. But it makes it very easy to run this whole setup. Now, mounting this reservoir is honestly pretty difficult, but there's only a couple spots this can really go. One is right here, like that. The problem is the fittings sit up too high, and you actually have to cut the hood skeleton. I had to cut it anyways for my setup, but you can see it would have been extremely intrusive to have this there. So the best option is to lay it down this way. And the way I did this was using a hose clamp around the car here, and then a little post here I made just out of some aluminum tubing that allows this to sort of squeeze into the side and pull out of the way of this stuff and mount pretty solid. So what I'm going to do now is just lay some rubber around the perimeter where that hose clamp is going to be. That way the hose clamp isn't directly on the plastic, because I don't want that to become a problem later. And we'll actually hard mount this right now, get that set up, and then I can actually drain the fluid out of this setup, install that pump, and then figure out a new spot to put the cooler, because the cooler is in front of the radiator and I want to move it out of the way of the radiator since I'm going front mount. Alright, so now with the bumper off, you can see where we have the cooler currently mounted. It's right up here. And I actually made a video mounting this before, but the problem now is when I go front mount, it's going to angle this way, and this is definitely getting in the way. So I have to either mount this flat to the radiator, which I'm not completely opposed to doing, or mount it in the front corner here, which I would like to do, but the intake is there. But that intake probably won't stay long term. I have plans for this way down the road, but it's just going to be a little interesting to figure it out right now. But honestly, I'm thinking about just mounting it straight to the radiator just to keep things simple. So I got some thinking to do, but I will figure it out and pick up this video when I do. Alright, this is what I've decided when it comes to the cooler. Mount it up flat against the radiator, you can see here. The sides of a radiator are not there's no coolant that runs through those, so I actually just put the screws straight into that side. Sort of self-tapped them in there, and now they'll fit. I'm apologizing for the light, you can't really see anything. But that's what we have. Now I'm getting line, going to run the line into here from the return from the rack, and then out of here to the reservoir, so that it'll be a clean system and work properly. Alright, it's going to be a little hard to show this just because of the sunlight and all that, but this is the setup. It is now finished. We have our Speed 3 feed line to our pump. I went ahead and bent the stock 6 line very carefully. You don't want to put too much stress on the fitting here, otherwise it could crack. Just wraps right around to stay tight to the frame rail to give me the most amount of space here, because that's the whole reason I swapped the pumps over. We've got our level good and all bled. We have our return line here from the rack, just wraps around, goes through the core support here into the radiator area. You can see it here, goes down straight into our cooler here, and then our feed from the rack, or I guess our return from the rack, wraps under and to this side of the cooler, so it allows the fluid to sort of work its way up, go out, back to the reservoir there. It works flawlessly, steering feels great, and the cooler does get hot and work, so I'm pretty confident in this setup. I'm just gonna go ahead and finish putting the car together, and we'll go ahead and conclude this. And with that, we have an outro. This car has been great, and the setup has worked out perfectly. I've driven it on a lot of daily driving, but also recently, meaning today, some nice back roads, and I have not found any problems with the setup. The only problem I have specifically with the setup is this pump's a little noisy towards the high RPM, but that's probably just this pump specifically. In terms of cooling and like consistency in the steering wheel, it's great. It feels just the same as it did before. I'm sure the pumps are the same between the 6 and the 3 internally, so the only difference here would be adding the reservoir here, which you can see is mounted up out of the way and in a nice spot with the stock 3 hoses and all that stuff. Even the return line just runs down to the cooler. Another massive benefit to this setup, besides having space to run intercooler piping, even if you're not going to do that, look at the serviceability here. I can dig the thermostat out of the car without lifting it, and if you had an AC compressor, you could actually do it without removing anything else, which is awesome. It's much easier to get this map sensor out. It's much easier to mess with this wiring. Like, everything is just so much easier to do now that I have all this space in here. So that is a massive benefit to this, along with, like I said, having the space. Serviceability is huge on cars like these, especially if you're going to be tracking them or driving them hard out in the mountains or doing whatever you want to do with them. If you're beating on them, serviceability is a massive thing, and it's a huge benefit to have if you could add it in. As with many other things I've done to this car, I'm sure it's been done, just not documented, so that's the whole point of this video. And that's really it. So thank you guys if you watched the whole way through, and obviously more to come. This car is never done.